Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, and a big hello to Soph Steinhorn, I think that says, from the United States of America on Apple Podcasts, who left a great rating and review of Tech Talks Daily. And she said, so great to hear so many experts in the tech world. Always a great conversation to tune into. So a huge thank you for taking the time to do that. It really does help this podcast reach new communities because of those pesky algorithms which determine who can discover the podcast. I think in a nutshell, the more ratings and reviews you get, the more Apple's algorithms will smile upon us favourably. So if you do leave a rating review, send me a screenshot to techblogwriter@outlook.com and I'll give you a shout out. But on with today's show. And I always say at every episode that technology works best when it brings people together. But right now, I see so much polarisation, division and binary thinking as everyone picks a side, whether it be left or right. And then tech is often accused of helping people stay entrenched in their views rather than speak with people from both sides and challenge their worldview. But have no fear, this is not a political podcast. I don't mind if you're on the left side of politics, the right side or in the centre. I'm just on a mission to prove that technology can actually bring us all closer together. So today I've invited Bilal Baloch onto the podcast, who's one of the nicest and smartest gentlemen I've ever had the privilege to speak with. And I've invited him on the podcast today to discuss the development of up-and-coming technologies that are changing the way we use information to make decisions, and also how technologies within the digital media landscape are actually promoting the consumption of low-quality information. And what does that mean? And are social media networks currently failing their users? And what are the potential implications of this? So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Washington, DC to listen to a conversation that I think will resonate with every single person, wherever they're listening in the world and wherever they sit on the political spectrum. But enough from me. Let's get today's guest on the podcast now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure, Neil. Thank you for having me on Tech Talks. Big fan. My name is Bilal Baloch. I'm the co-founder and COO of Enquire.ai, and we build software to enable organizations to connect with experts outside of their organization and receive expert-driven information and content, or capitalize and leverage their own in-house experts to be able to better gather information more efficiently and effectively, especially in our remote and decentralized workspace today.
Fantastic. And as you listen to the show, you know by now that I'm going to ask you, what's your origin story? How did you get here? Where did your passion for tech come from? And the fact that you're clearly a Londoner speaking to me in Washington suggests that there is an origin story there.
So really, the origin story is in two parts. One is professionally over the last 10 years. I've really been balancing two professional paths. One as an academic. I did my master's at the Fletcher School at Tufts University, just outside of Boston, in international affairs, and then returned back to the UK to do my PhD at Oxford in political science, and then went on to teach international affairs, international business at places such as the Lauder Institute, at the Wharton School of Business, at the University of Pennsylvania, and my main research areas as an academic were really around decision-making, especially government decision-making when they're faced with a crisis. And in terms of my regional interest, I've always been quite fascinated by the political, business, and security ongoings in the Middle East and South Asia, and the US and UK's foreign relations with countries in those regions. And then the second path has been as a consultant. I worked primarily in the political risk industry and the expert network space, both in London as an independent consultant in Washington. And both those pathways really converge in starting Enquire.ai, which I'm sure we'll get more into. And prior to that, on a personal level, the origin story really goes back to Essex, where I grew up, and spent the majority of my life studying, working, and then moved to Washington, D.C. Around about 2009. I did my undergrad at the London School of Economics. And as I'm sure you and many of your listeners know, anyone who studies at the LSE, even if you study subjects not in economics, people tend to go and work on Wall Street or Fleet Street and in banking. But of course, when I graduated, the world's financial institutions were collapsing. And so me and many of my friends and peers looked to other avenues to go and get some work. And I wound up in DC. It was an exciting time. President Obama had just come to office, and many of us were just turning up and trying to find work in research, speech writing, and the like. And it really sparked an interest for me in global issues, in global insights, in global affairs. And that then went on to take me onto this professional journey in working in that space, and today building a business in that space.
Wow. And when I've interviewed, nearly 2,000 people here, and the amount of times I hear stories like that where you think you've got everything planned out and your life's taking you in a certain direction, and then boom, the universe nudges you back in the right direction of where you're meant to go, but you drive yourself crazy thinking about it. But one thing that does stand out, though, is your passion for knowledge and decision making, and how it was that path that actually led you to Enquire.ai, which is on a mission to make organizations knowledge efficient. But can you tell me a little bit more about that and the problems that you set out to solve for your customers?
Yeah. So I think my professional and personal story is pretty clear as to how building a business in the global insight space came about. But I think the spark that really nudged me and my co-founders over into getting to building was what we were seeing around ourselves in the current information environment. Oftentimes these shifts are generational, right? Just like today's Gen Z is unlikely to get their news from TV, perhaps even own a TV or news websites. My generation, classified as the millennials, we were kind of the first mutts to sort of switch over from, reading newspapers and gathering our information from TV to purely digital means, right? Whether that was social media or digital forms of knowledge platforms. You'll remember the explosion of the blogosphere and everyone having a WordPress, which was the real precursor to Substack. And so I think for us, it was always at the front of our minds that, how can technology, in the same way it was able to disrupt and, quite frankly, improve ways of news and information gathering, how could that same trend take place and shape in the industries that we were working in global insights, in consulting, in political risk? Because, quite frankly, those worlds were still dominated by the old order, right? So to put a fine point on it, if you were a researcher or an investor or a decision maker at a large corporate or in the private capital space, you would essentially go and pay several hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, to go and get access to consultants and companies that could tell you how the world works. Mm-hmm. And we looked around ourselves and we saw a few trends. One is the one that I highlighted earlier about technology enablement, changing the way consumers behave and information is spread. But also at a global level, the type of what we consider knowledge workers, those that essentially come from industries where they have to think for a living or use ideas in order to advance their products and services. There was a real proliferation of them also in emerging markets. And so with the advent of, everyone having a supercomputer in their pocket and an expanding knowledge economy around the world, we essentially came to the very basic but fundamental conclusion that how can we connect businesses directly to the sources on the ground around the world and do so rapidly? And so that was the motivation, Neil. That was the spark. And so we got about building the platform that we have today.
And we're both from the UK, and we've seen the consumption of low quality information on red top media, all those tabloid newspapers over the years in traditional media. But to understand the problem we're talking about today, can you tell me a bit more about how technologies within the digital media landscape are now promoting the consumption of low quality information in ways that we've never seen before? Yeah,
that's right. You said to me at the start of our conversation that I'm wearing a Liverpool Football Club cap. And, those of us who are diehard Liverpool fans can't forget what happened in the aftermath of the Hillsborough disaster and the role that one of the red top newspapers, who I won't mention, played in spreading misinformation. And so whenever people talk about misinformation and fake news, I always think that the problem is not new, right? Yeah. Even think about books. We consider books as this ultimate source of truth. They've gone through printing presses, peer reviews, etc. But for every handful of books that you rely on that have inspired you, there's probably 2-3x that many that have spread lies, propaganda, that have helped countries and governments, crush protests or go to war. So the problem of misinformation is not new. What is new is simply the scale, right? And we saw this accelerated, quite frankly, with the start of the pandemic, right? Many people sought out accurate and reliable information during the crisis, and trusted and high quality sources took on a whole new meaning, right? How do we respond to government legislation and public health guidelines around vaccines, around quarantine, around travel, and doing all of this from the space of our homes and not having the usual social connectivity in person, whether it be at work or elsewhere in our schools, where you can discuss with experts, where you can exchange ideas and come to sort of collective conclusions. So I think a lot has changed in terms of the pace of misinformation, and at the same time, a parallel trend of how we go about procuring that information. And for better or worse, social media platforms that started off as a way for us to be connected and see photos of our loved ones and connect with old university pals have become news organizations. But their incentives and the regulatory environment in which they function are completely at askew from what constitutes reliable, trusted data, right? Once upon a time, we had one source of data, one source of information in tightly knit groups. Then fast forward, many years, and we turned to the aggregation of information and a single source of truth in TV channels or newspapers that we trusted. But right now, you're receiving information from social media channels, from individuals that are writing their perspective and their opinion through their mechanisms, be it a website or a blog or a Substack. There's a proliferation of newspapers and TV channels online and offline. And so the challenge is, how do we separate out what constitutes reliable, trusted sources? And I say that because we at Enquire, and my view on this generally, is that substance we can debate, right? Ideology we can debate. But we're at a place right now, Neil, where even verifying where something comes from is at risk. And that's what we're looking to solve for at Enquire. And that's what I think that social media platforms that are in this confused space of, are we a news organization? Are we not? Are we producing information that is sullied by corporate and government or party interests or not? They haven't been able to solve that puzzle.
Yeah, it still blows my mind. I don't know the exact figure, but I know it's by far the majority of people will check their daily news, not from the TV, but from social media. But then social media say, hey, we're not a news organisation. It's absolutely insane. And of course, if we look around as well, those same social media networks are designed just to keep people endlessly scrolling. And if we have a look around at any public place, you'll see people caught in that endless scroll there, and they get given more information that will keep them scrolling, which will strengthen their views rather than make them challenge their worldview. But that's a topic for another day. But can you expand on possibly how social media networks are currently failing their users because of this?
Yeah, it goes back to the challenge of news aggregation.
Yeah.
Right. I think for the longest time as consumers, whether that's on a personal level or on a professional level in our workspace, where all of us are conducting some form of research, right?
Yeah.
I think we've been too partial to give me the answer, tell me what I need to know. And although the impulses of that are valuable in that people don't want to waste time, people want to be able to move on with the analytical piece, the analysis piece, the debate piece of their daily work and life, and they fundamentally just want to be given the data, we have to react to the challenge that we have. And the challenge that we have is all these different spaces that are providing us with information don't have the mechanisms to be able to curate in the way that we need. So someone picking out their phone and scrolling through Facebook and other forms of information sharing in London or Durban or Sao Paulo or Delhi, that news, that information is being targeted to them in a way that tracks, what they're reading, where they're looking, what they're buying, what they're researching. And on the one hand, we can say that that brings about a more surgical, targeted way to present information to someone, but it necessitates the advent of tunnel vision and tunnel reading. We've seen this play out in our politics, right? How this was capitalized upon during not just, I would argue, Brexit and the election of Donald Trump in the US, but moving beyond any ideological positions. This is happening in elections around the world on a daily basis. This is happening around the world when it comes to our understanding of the Russia-Ukraine war. These are major world events. These are major issues on a daily basis that impact, the price of oil or the spiraling of inflation or how much we pay for our social services. And it can be traced back to how we're learning about these topics. And so without being able to see or hear or view an alternative perspective, we're getting into dangerous territory.
We really are. And I'm glad you said that. Especially around looking for the alternate perspective, because many of the traditional media outlets, and over here in the UK, BBC, Guardian, and there's a number of ones in the US as well, have all gathered together to create a trusted news network where people can say that these handful of people are trusted. But then equally, you've got a handful of people controlling what everybody thinks. So it's such a delicate balance, isn't it, to deliver factual information? Like you say, we can debate everything afterwards and getting that balance right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, pointing out the problem doesn't necessarily mean that the solution is easy.
Yeah.
And it is hard. And I commend the BBC. There's also other platforms like I believe it's called Tortoise Media, actually started by former BBC journalists who were saying, look, one of the things is also behavioral. Let's slow down. Let's slow down to speed up. Let's read longer pieces. Let's engage with information and data sources that aren't just headlines or, 240 or 260 characters. And I think all those steps are really quite valuable. And another one is providing or building platforms that can provide diverse views, randomized views that perhaps fall outside of the usual logic of the algorithm that is just focused on being targeted and surgical, and presenting you, the user, with information that you otherwise perhaps wouldn't see or read. Right now, for me to be able to come across different views and perspectives, if I was, say, on one of the traditional social media sites, I would have to follow or befriend or link up with people and places outside of my traditional information diet. But what if these platforms were set up to actually present you with targeted stuff that aims at presenting you with information that has trusted sources and is gathering steam because people consider it to be valuable information, but also presenting you with data and information that perhaps is on the fringes. And I think that kind of a mix, that kind of a diversity, which is invariably pegged to diverse people, diverse teams of information authors, that's really the situation and position that we need to move towards.
It really is. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're listening to this and you're on the left or the right.
Correct.
The way that everything's presented to you, it's all aimed at dividing you from that person on the other side. And traditionally, we would sit in a bar or have a coffee somewhere. We'd both agree to disagree and go our separate ways. But a lot of people can't seem to do that now, can they? And when they hear something that's outside of their echo chamber, they just see red straight away.
And the pandemic has made this even worse, Neil, right? Because we don't have those real world social networking, let's say, those spaces, those nodes, right? The workspace, the pub, the sports team, where that was ripped away from us for a little while. And, thankfully it's slowly but surely beginning to come back, but it won't ever be the same again, unfortunately. And so that leaves us with the digital space. So we have no choice but to enhance and improve our digital world to be able to take the best from our real world. And that is being able to present us with opportunities to exchange ideas, to be presented with information and data that is trustworthy, verifiable, and authentic, but at the same time, that we are being opened up to diverse positions as well. And that certainly in my world, where I'm interacting with investors and corporates who are using our tool, they really appreciate that. They no longer want just a house position. They don't just want to be told this is what needs to be done. They can make that decision internally. Our job is to make sure that they have authenticated, verified information from subject matter experts, and that those subject matter experts come from a diversity of backgrounds, and that then the decision maker can do with that what they want. And so we can't just have this surface level view of democratizing access, right? Democratizing access should not just mean, well, let's give it to everyone, right? Democratizing access needs to be more about, well, let's present everyone with a diversity of views and then trust them to make the right decision, so long as that information is verified and from subject matter experts and people in the know, and that we can trace the sourcing, right? One of my favorite films is the Disney cartoon Ratatouille. And there's a line in there that says, a cook can come from anywhere, but not everyone can cook. And I think we've assumed that democratizing information and data means that everyone can do it. No, it means that it can come from everywhere. And we need to present that to people that are making key decisions in the public or the private space.
100% with you on that. And I think everyone listening have seen the implications of the spread of misinformation from, like we said, Brexit, the UK election, the US election, the war in Ukraine, COVID, and we could go on. And it's a real threat to democracy now in many levels. But why is there such a lack of trust behind an abundance of data? And what steps do you think we need to take to ignite this wave of change that me and you are talking about here? We both agree with, and I suspect everyone at home is thinking the same. But how do we ignite that wave of change?
That's a really good question. And, quite frankly, the answer is that there's a lot of work to be done. The puzzle I'll outline to you, we produce and consume and see more data now than we ever have throughout history. And more data was produced most likely in the last 2 years than at any point in history before it. We are fundamentally in an era of information overload, not just in terms of its volume, but also the velocity with which it's coming at us, its veracity. And this is the challenge, because the tools we have to be able to crunch through it, to make meaning of it, are currently still growing, which is to say they're trying to keep pace with that information overload problem. So I think by and large, companies that are working on tools to be able to improve our knowledge economy, to be able to enhance the way we can organize and crunch data, I think they're growing, right? Over 55% of organizations today report that they're placing a high priority on increasing investment in what we call intelligent technologies, right? Technologies that can leverage data, advanced analytics, machine learning, and AI to be able to make meaning of information that's coming at us from everywhere so that decision-making can be improved. Enquire.ai is one of those companies. So I'm a forever optimist. I think, we're building those technologies now. And while we have the delta and while those technologies are built, I think the responsibility is on us as consumers to make sure that we're just a lot more intentional and selective about where we are looking for reliable data and verifiable data. And I think one big sea change we'll see, which will enable the mechanisms of being able to crunch data and information and make meaning of it to outpace the information overload challenge, is going to be through technologies like the blockchain, which I'm really excited about, because this is one way in which all of us can fundamentally track and authenticate where information is coming from, and the building blocks of a particular claim or the building blocks of a particular document, the building blocks of a particular contract, how we can trace it and record it and hold accountable where it comes from. I think that's going to be one of the big sea changes. So there will be a revolution in, the way in which technology is able to get us back to a position where we can mimic the old world of, information coming at us in ways that we can trust that it's been authenticated and then make decisions based off of it. I think that's on its way.
Let's hope so. And I had an epiphany recently. I was scrolling down my phone endlessly for 25 minutes. And I tell you, if you were to ask me, Neil, from that 25 minutes you just spent scrolling down, what did you learn? What can you remember? I can't tell you anything. But if it then glitches out and then goes back to the top and you have to try and find where you were, you don't realise just how much information you've actually scrolled through there. But what do you think the future of information consumption will look like? And are there any particular trends that you're already beginning to see in this space?
Yeah, I think the blockchain is one, right? Yeah. Because it allows us, as I'm banging the drum on, the key has to be authenticating and tracing where a particular nugget and gobbet of information is coming from, which feeds into our contracts, which feeds into our news environment, which feeds into the way in which we make decisions about investing in a particular piece of business or even property, right? Information and information around pricing is impacting all of us on a daily basis. So I think blockchain technologies are going to really smash open the door on the current challenge of being able to authenticate and verify. Another place that I'm very excited about, going back to your point there about, we've lost the spaces to be able to debate and discuss and reach consensus and conclusions around content. I think we can revive those through the metaverse, right? It's not just Facebook that's building a metaverse, right? There are many entities that are building a metaverse. There are many entities that are thinking about what a virtual space looks like. And for us, certainly, and I can speak to our own vision on that, we live in a world day to day where we're trying to think about how do we improve the way in which knowledge workers, those of us that are in consulting, in media, in investment focused careers and professions, how can we get the best content and data from around the world in a way that is time efficient? And currently we do that by connecting decision makers to experts around the world in real time. But the day is not too far that we'll be able to do that in a virtual realm too. So putting on your VR headset, allowing you, the decision maker, to be able to speak with an expert and interact with an expert in the metaverse who is in a different country, in a different context, who doesn't need, a visa or a plane or a couple of days to be able to get to you. And for you to be able to do that, take down notes, collaborate with your team, all in a way that certainly feels emotionally, but also visually a lot more interactive than just talking over a screen. Of course, present company included.
I love it. Nice little get out there. But there is a growing mistrust in traditional media. And even if we put that to one side, we've got Gen Z audiences and millennials that are not watching the news on the TV now, and the declining audience figures for well-known news outlets such as CNN and MSNBC.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think that means for the future of the news cycle? Is there anything that you think there, especially around how up-and-coming technologies will continue to change the way we use information to make decisions? Because that TV problem, that's not going to go away, is it, for those people?
It's really challenging, Neil. I grew up on TV news. For me, if it was on TV, it was gospel, right? But also my life revolved around the TV, right? Coming home from school, sitting with family, for better or for worse, you sat around this box, and it used to be a box, and you discussed what was happening in the news, what was happening in your local news. You'd always get a gobbet of, public interest news that gave you a nice positive story about a cat being rescued or something. It was all revolving around news and information flowing through this sort of digital box. And you're right, you touched upon it there. Today's generation doesn't have that same cultural association with the TV. So it's not just about trusting CNN and MSNBC, which I think we've covered, but it's also about your cultural association with the medium through which you're receiving that information. And most people can open up their phone and, like you said, scroll and watch something on a quick TikTok video or on a Twitter video or on YouTube and receive information. And if that makes them feel as though they're informed and that they have sufficiently received information that they can then share with colleagues or peers or friends, then that's where news establishments like MSNBC, CNN, and others that you named need to start thinking. The challenge is also going to arrive with the fact that this is one of the most unique times in history where multiple generations are engaging with these same sources, right? More and more people are working into later ages. More and more people are engaged with media, traditional or new. So that expands the segments of audiences, right? So you have boomers, millennials, Gen X, Gen Z, Gen Y. These are all very different audiences that need to be marketed to and targeted for how information is not just being shared in terms of the mechanism, but what constitutes for them something that they're interested in, right? For example, I was talking to a few Gen Zers the other day about the Russia-Ukraine war. And, they were far more interested in the issue of refugees. You talk to a different set of viewers from a different generation, perhaps mine, and they're more interested in the repercussions for the US and what is the US looking to do in terms of its foreign relations and foreign policy in Europe. Are they going to get mired in another war? Should they? Is that something that the US should be thinking about right now? And it shows a deep concern for what's happening around the world, but from very different perspectives, from very different value sources. And so I think the challenge is not just of the mechanism through which information is being projected, but what kind of news and where its focus is. The emphasis is also going to be different, and that's also going to matter. So again, it gets us back to the challenge of we need to produce a lot of content and a lot of information that is curated. But until we can figure out and solve for the fact that these pieces of information, this flow of content is coming from reliable sources and we can trace it and authenticate it, we can't really get into fundamental debates.
And it really is a huge problem. And kudos to you and your teams for tackling this problem head on. And I'm curious, just to celebrate what you're doing here, do you have any examples of how AI is empowering Fortune 500 companies such as Apple and Oracle, etc., through knowledge and this complete range of perspectives that we're talking about today?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I'm not going to mention some of our clients and teams, but really the way to think about us is we're empowering clients when they need to monitor an event, right? Be that a market changing event, a global changing event, a local changing event, right? And that could be everything from a piece of legislation to a chip shortage to a change in leadership at a organization or in a particular ministry, or a shift in technologies. We're subject agnostic, but the one key way in which we're being used is event monitoring, where our clients want to know on a regular daily basis from subject matter experts and from a variety of subject matter experts quickly and succinctly what's happening on this particular issue. It's constantly changing. Keep us informed. The second is their daily research. And this is where, to be more specific, our clients that are in the consulting space, in the private capital investment space come in, where they are doing daily research and daily due diligence on companies, on corporates and other entities that they may be looking at, investing in, looking to partner with, looking to pitch to. And they need reliable data. They need reliable information. And that's where simply asking a question on our platform enables you to be able to receive, subject matter expertise verified by a combination of our patented AI and human subject matter experts, to be able to reliably say, okay, before we make a decision on this particular company, or before we pitch this particular company, we feel confident in the fact that we've gathered, trusted information because we know where it's coming from and who's saying what to us. Those are really the two main use cases, event monitoring and daily research. And this really happens in situations when a lot of our clients can't find the answers internally. And so they come to us for it. But we're also building software, Neil, that is going to eventually enable organizations to know who knows what inside their own companies. So one of the biggest shifts that's happened in the knowledge economy after the pandemic is that we're all now getting used to having our core daily work life functioning on our computers from home, or it's certainly in a decentralized way, right? You may see your colleagues once or twice a week, but beyond that, we're getting used to a work environment that is equally digital and decentralized. And so in that way, over time, knowing who knows what, when, and how in your own company, especially at other offices, is a real challenge. And historically, you and many of your listeners will have, opened up their email, thrown in a bunch of their colleagues in the BCC line and said, hey, who knows X about Y? And not only is email not a dynamic tool to do that, but that approach assumes that you know who to go to. Mm-hmm. Where we're building software off of our patented tech that will now enable organizations to essentially ask questions, and that's it. Ask questions, and our technology will do the rest and find the people within your own organization, whether it's your colleague sitting down the corridor from you, or whether it's your colleague sitting in the San Francisco office, who will be able to answer and shed light on your query. And this can save companies several millions of dollars for every 1,000 employees every year. And probably more importantly, give back 40% of the work week back to employees, because that's the time they're currently wasting using it for either searching for information they can't find or building knowledge assets like pitches or investment theses or other information assets that already exist inside their own firms. So that's the fundamental value proposition that we have, that, you know, we want to put forward an information environment that is driven by experts, that is fast, rapid, and verifiable, and where you can trust the sourcing and see the sourcing for yourself, but also allowing our clients and our users an ability to be more efficient with their time as they seek out knowledge.
Absolutely love that, and I think it's a beautiful moment to end on. But me and you both come from a time where the news finished with a nice, happy story you mentioned before. So on that front, let's leave everyone listening with an inspirational note. Is there a book, a song, or anything that you'd like to leave the listeners with that you can share, and maybe a story behind your choice too?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of your other episodes, and this is the part of your podcast that sort of had me stumped a little bit, because I was thinking, what can I put forward? I'm not sure about inspirational, but let me give it a go. So I'm a big 90s R&B and hip hop fan. So the song is Most Def Mathematics. I think it's one of the greatest hip hop songs, and I'll just let your listeners listen to it and glean from it what they will, and take whichever inspiration they want. For me, it's bound up in nostalgia and the 90s. So it's inspiring for me. And the books, I want to cheat a bit and give you two. Yeah. The first is A Fine Balance by Rohinton Mistry. It's a book that I read during my graduate studies at Oxford, and a book that I think paints a picture of real lived politics and society. And I think in a world in which we're seeing so much inequality, not just in terms of information and data inequality, but wealth and social and otherwise, a book that can really bring home to you how politics and society is experienced on a daily basis is really quite empowering. And I would highly recommend that. And then the second, and a favorite of many entrepreneurs, is Shoe Dog by Nike co-founder Phil Knight, which I think is one of the most honest accounts of what it takes to build a business. And knowing that someone like Phil Knight went through that is really quite inspiring, because, you know, building a business and especially a startup is not easy, and you face challenges that you think, gosh, am I the only one going through this, or am I facing fatigue in building this? And when you open up a book like that and see that actually the founders of one of the greatest brands ever went through a similar, if not an even more chaotic journey, it can be quite humbling and soothing. So those are my recommendations.
Wow, for saying you were struggling, you've left us with two great books and a cracking tune there. So I'll get those added to the Amazon wishlist and our Spotify playlist. And finally, for anyone listening, wanting to learn more about Enquire.ai, anything we talked about today, contacting your team, etc., what's the best starting point?
Yeah, absolutely. The first place is our website, Inquire.ai. Come there, check out our use cases, learn about us. If you're a client interested in using our platform, book a demo with us. You know, at the very least, you'll learn how we're looking to change our information and knowledge environment and solve for some of the problems that Neil and I have discussed today. Please also follow us across our socials. The handles are different for all of them, but the first good place to start is our Twitter page, which is Inquire_AI. And please get in touch with me. I'm at Bilal Baloch, and I'm sure Neil can put that in on the website when he puts up the podcast. Follow me on Twitter. Would love to engage there and elsewhere.
Awesome. For sure, I will get those links on the blog post that accompanies this episode. So much I've loved about today's episode. We have covered a hell of a lot in a short amount of time, from how technologies within the digital media landscape are promoting the consumption of low-quality information, how social media networks are currently failing their users, the potential implications of the spread of information. So much of what we've talked about will resonate with every single person listening, wherever they're located in the world. And even more so, your personal story, your origin story, and leaving us with the two great books and great song. But seriously, thank you so much for taking the time to share all that with me today.
Thank you, Neil. It's absolutely my pleasure. And thank you for all the great work that you're doing on Tech Talks.
So much I loved about our discussion now, and also exploring the development of up-and-coming technologies that are changing the way we use the information to make decisions, and how Enquire is actually empowering Fortune 500 companies navigate through knowledge and a complete range of different perspectives. That's what it should be all about. Not just sitting in an echo chamber and having your own views spoon-fed back to you in a continuous loop, or receiving pre-packaged thoughts. The way we all grow is sharing perspective, sharing stories, and realising that we've all got so much more in common than certain elements of the media would like us to believe. But hey, there's a whole other podcast right there. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but I would love to hear your thoughts on anything we talked about today. There may be things you agreed with, there may be things you disagreed with, but whatever it is, I invite you to share them with me by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn at Neil C. Hughes. And if you'd like to send more than an email or a direct message, I'll invite you to come here and sit with me on this podcast, and we'll get your story on here too. That's what it's all about. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode as much as I did. I'll return again tomorrow. We've got a completely different topic to dive into, and I'm quite looking forward to that one too. So hopefully you will join me. But a big thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.